Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. And for those of you who are new, haven't heard this podcast before, we've got about 12 years of great founding interviews with founders, with CEOs, with entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies. You can check out my past episodes with the CEO of Quicken, founder of Netflix, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activision Blizzard, many more. And I personally am also the co-founder of Rise 25, where I help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest here today, his name is Rich O'Neill. He runs a company in the construction, not in the construction space, in the property management space, grew up in the construction space and had a number of mentors that he learned from and kind of learned about entrepreneurship from that, including his father-in-law, who he knew at a very young age. We'll get into what that means because it sounds a little weird. And looking forward to that. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25. We help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can go to our website at rise25.com to learn all about what we do. All right, Rich, great to have you here. And I kind of joked about it, but you knew your father-in-law from age about 3 years old, not because you got married at a really young age, but right. you knew your now wife from a very young age. Yeah. Why don't we clear up that whole mess? Because I kind of botched it on the intro.
Sure. No,
you met your wife at a young age.
Yeah. So my wife was my sister's best friend growing up. So, started out as a very different relationship than what we have now, but it's still great both ways. And, her family's been really a close part of our family for a very long time too. So
we could dive into the whole personal side some other episode. Sure. That's for a different podcast.
Yeah.
But on the business side, so from age 3, so Barrett is your father-in-law. He started in the business of on the service side of lawn care, correct?
Correct. Yeah, making lawns green and getting rid of the weeds.
And he moved into the product side and developed a number of different products around keeping lawns green.
Yep.
Yeah. And what are your memories from working or from, as a kid? Because he actually had a big impact on your father, actually, in your words, shamed your father to go from working for big developers, which he didn't enjoy, to starting his own business, a residential home building company.
Yeah. So I say it that way because it's a little bit more dramatic. It probably wasn't that bad, but, we were so close for so long. My parents, both my dad and Barrett, my dad, Steve, and Barrett, my mother-in-law, Tina, and my mom, Michelle, they were all really close friends growing up. And Barrett kind of grew up in entrepreneurship, right? He started his first business when I think he was 16 or so. So that was kind of all he ever knew. And my dad was kind of the opposite of that, where, my grandfather worked more or less for the same company all of his life, and only more recently got another job somewhere else. And so he was very much in that, work for someone, get the paycheck, all of that for a very long time, which there's nothing wrong with, but Barrett was able to expose him to maybe a different way of thinking, which was, you really don't like what you're doing, right? You like some aspects, you like the industry, you like some things, but working for someone else doesn't seem to be working for you. So why couldn't you go do that yourself and make more money, have more freedom to spend time with your family, all of these things that can, not always, but often do come along with being an entrepreneur. So after years of that conversation, my dad finally took the bait and started a home building company where they would build small to medium subdivisions. You're more or less the Pulte model, just a smaller company where they
smaller
would,
scale.
so they would buy lots from developers. They would build one of 4 models that have a couple of options, but they just cranked them out. So, when I was about 8 is when he started that company. And that really made a big impact on me because I kind of got to see it a little bit of both ways, right? My dad still had a lot of those tendencies of like, I need to be really conservative. I need to do these things. And my father-in-law, Barrett, is an absolute nutcase in the best possible way, right? Like he takes risks. He does a lot of things that a lot of people wouldn't do because they'd be too afraid. Yeah. So I got to see both sides of that from a really young age. And that had a big impact on me. I use the analogy of rich dad, poor dad, right? My dad was in no ways poor, but if you ever go read that book from Robert Kiyosaki, the dichotomy of both of those perspectives really had a big impact on me.
Yeah, it's like your own personal experience with that, because that book really is about kind of mindsets and how you approach life and
right.
Diversify risk and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Your father, do you recall from those age when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, do you recall him working late, long hours? Was it, many businesses when they're getting started, it kind of is a struggle before they gain traction. What was that like?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the biggest things I've ever learned from my dad is to work hard. He worked and still works really hard. So sometimes that meant long hours. Sometimes that meant, getting in and doing things he didn't want to do, all of that. And so that did sometimes mean later nights, wasn't able to make a soccer, lacrosse game, whatever. But and that was really in the early stages. And I don't remember that quite as much, but after a couple of years and, being around people like Barrett and people that run their own businesses, he learned a lot and was able to bring in the right people to get things done without him there all the time. And, when I was 10, 12, 13, really formative years, he was home every summer. He was home and we had a boat on the Chesapeake Bay. And sometimes one of the bigger things that stuck out for me was that it wasn't terribly difficult for him to leave Thursday night and go home Tuesday morning. Or, maybe we take a long week or something. And he had that ability sometimes, which was really cool. And I didn't like being exposed to that, which a lot of people aren't. Being exposed to that was like, why would I ever want to be locked into this 40-hour week where I have to be at work 9 to 5 every day or 8 to 5 or whatever it is? So to answer the question, yes, there were late nights. There was a lot of, there were late nights, early mornings. Sometimes there was stuff on the weekends if stuff came up, whatever. But there was also the flip side of that, which was really awesome too. Yeah.
You saw both sides of it, really.
Yeah.
And then at what point do you recall becoming conscious of, kind of Barrett's, his approach to entrepreneurship? Do you recall him taking you aside at age 8, 9, 10, 11, and kind of teaching lessons, or did you observe him also, being able to have the flexibility to take times off? And I know we'll get into it. You later went to go work for Barrett, but at the younger age, do you recall those things?
Not a lot, just being around him and understanding what his business did, some of the things that he was doing. I was that annoying kid that wanted to ask a lot of questions. So it wasn't so much of a, hey, let me come teach you something. It was a lot of me, how does this work? Or what do you do here? And he was always way more than willing to share. As soon as I'd open the door, it was a floodgate. So that definitely happened, maybe a little bit different than you described, but he was definitely around and had that impact early. Yeah.
Now you had kind of a pivotal experience in your life. So you were a lacrosse player and were headed to go play lacrosse in college. You recruited to play at Penn State. It's all you ever wanted. You're ready to do it. And it didn't work out the last minute. Tell us the story.
Yeah. So again, formative time for me was the way lacrosse recruiting worked was junior year was like the summer going into your junior year was one of the biggest recruiting seasons. And at least at the time, they've changed it since then. But once you got into junior year, you can make your verbal commitments to different schools. And so that summer going in, I was pretty much all I wanted was Penn State. I wanted to go to Penn State. We had played lacrosse tournaments up there before, and it was relatively close to home. It was a lot of things that I wanted. And so I had the opportunity to make that commitment there. They made me an offer, and it worked out going in junior year. So that happens when you're going to a Division I school. That happens across the board. And so they more or less have their recruiting class locked in by give or take Christmas of your junior year. So midway through. So I'm going through junior year. It's all great. And at the end of that season, the end of my junior season, that coach was let go. So they relatively quickly hired a new coach. I was in touch with the athletic director, all these things as it was going, and they brought in a new coach relatively quickly. And that coach came to the existing class and said, "Hey, there's nothing to worry about here. We're good. I'm going to come see you at some point this season." I had never met him. I had never talked to him. And I'm going to come see you sometime this summer recruiting season and make sure you're still a fit. So I said, great. I played my ass off all summer and was like trying to make sure he was going to be there as many times as possible, all of this, right? And I think he ended up being able to see me for about 5 minutes that summer. And that was not a good feeling, right? Like he's not really trying all that hard to come see us. And sure enough, at the end of that season, like the very end where, it was almost too late. He came to us and said, the entire class who I had kind of gotten to know, he went to the entire class and said, "Yeah, we're going a different direction. We've got a whole other class we're bringing in." So that was really brutal, right? Everything I ever wanted. I'd spent the whole last year thinking that was the deal, and
telling everyone.
Yeah,
sure, yeah.
Rug got ripped out. So my dad was huge in that, and the biggest lesson I learned out of that was, shit's going to happen, right? Like terrible things are going to happen to you. The biggest thing that you can do to come out of that is have options. Get as many options as you can and then make a decision, right? If you don't go and search for those options, then you're really stuck. Yeah. But if you can go find something else, find opportunities, whatever it is, then you can make something good out of it.
And did you so you ended up going to St. Joe's, which is much closer to home, which actually had a big impact because your now wife, you remained in touch with her. Right. But did you have that as an option, or did you really scramble to make that an option?
It kind of made it an option. Yeah. So it was, the 11th hour. I had talked to that coach at one point very early in the process several years ago, but it kind of got ruled out pretty quickly. And so I think it was give or take August 1st was like when I got the news. Within 2 weeks, I went to see St. Joe's, Sacred Heart, Hartford, Fairfield, a couple of others. I think I went to 5 different schools within 2 weeks of that just to go get my options. Yeah. And ended up at St. Joe's. And then another funny story, that coach was let go the end of my senior year. And I'm sitting on the beach with a bunch of my friends after graduation, and I get that email, which was fun, but that ended up working out fine because paperwork was signed. There was nothing was going to happen there. But that was just like, someone doesn't want me here. Jeez, yeah. But that ended up working out.
So, and as a result of that, I don't know if you were dating your wife at the time or not, but she ends up staying. You remained in close touch. Obviously, that relationship works out. But also it got you closer to your father-in-law. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we started dating shortly after that, I did my freshman year at St. Joe's. I ended up she went to College of Charleston. I followed her down there, transferred my sophomore year to go be with her. And when I started dating my wife, I really got to know my father-in-law more because he's very protective of his daughters. He's got 2 daughters. and other boyfriends that they had, it was like a legend that he was going to grill you. And he is very good at like digging in and finding the little thing that is going to expose you as a terrible person. Right. So it was hilarious to hear him tell the stories of past boyfriends. And now I'm the boyfriend.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit different because he had known me, but I think he wanted to be close to make sure that nothing had changed since I was 10, 11, 12.
Right. And you end up after college going to work for him right after college, right? Now, what was that experience like?
Yeah, that was really cool. So his third startup is a product for the golf, lawn care, and agriculture industries. And it's basically a fertilizer. We don't need to get into the details there, but really cool, innovative product. And so I went to work for him. I did an internship one summer because, we needed the internship credit, and he was happy to get the more or less free labor. He paid me something, but it wasn't much. And then a sales position opened up, and I was supposed to go to my senior year of college and ended up taking that job instead. So being in a company like that, where it was, I think at the time there were probably 15 people in the company, and they were raising equity rounds and doing all this really cool, innovative stuff and trying to figure out things that hadn't been done before. It was really, really eye-opening for me that like, hey, this is cool. This is what I like to be around.
And a sales job, the sales job tends to be eat what you kill, you either survive or you don't. So you're in a sales role for your father-in-law.
Yep.
And so did you get any grace, or was it, pretty much, well, you sink or swim?
So I was structured very similarly to the other sales guys, which there was a small base salary, but it was pretty well eat what you kill. And frankly, I didn't do very well at it. So it only lasted for a little while. Maybe the grace was that I wasn't doing awesome, and he kept me around for a little bit longer than maybe he should have. Did
you have to have a hard conversation with him or with a sales manager?
No. So it actually ended up working out really well, because right around that time where I was kind of feeling like I was being a drag at that point, and it was not awesome. I loved my time there. That can complicate
so many different things, right? You've got a long-standing relationship with your father-in-law since before he was your father-in-law.
Right.
You've got, your now wife.
Right.
You got the company relationships.
Yeah. So it was complicated for me internally. This never really came up as a conversation among us, but it was kind of apparent that I wasn't doing awesome at sales. And I after analyzing it later, I could talk to people all day long, and that was great. I was good at that part. I was not good at the systems that need to go into being an effective salesperson. So some of the things that make me a good entrepreneur made me probably not so great at sales in itself. So anyway, we can come back to that, but
which is challenging, because as an entrepreneur, you also need to do sales most of the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
At least when you're getting started.
Yeah. And it is hard for me to stick to a system, because that's just, I want to innovate systems. I want to fix systems. I want to work on those systems. Right. Being in the system was not a great fit for me.
A lot of entrepreneurs want to design the system and then move on, give it to someone else to follow through on. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was me. And when I had to work in the system in my own business, it's hard. It is very hard.
And just to wrap up kind of the college discussion,
sure.
On your LinkedIn, it looks like you circled back and ended up going to Penn State later.
I did. Yeah. So full circle. I have a degree from the Pennsylvania or the University of, or what is it?
Penn State University.
I never went to the campus, right?
Oh, got it.
I finished it online.
Oh, wow.
But I have a degree from the Pennsylvania State University, which is all that matters.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So full circle there, but I did my last year at their global campus. Yeah.
So how did Fleming properties and Fleming Property Management come about then?
Yeah. So when I was at school in Charleston, I took a couple of real estate classes, and it was just elective classes, but I got hooked. I was actually going to the courthouse in Charleston County to watch the foreclosure auctions because I was just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
And really, if you think about it, it was a great fit for me because the other class that I really liked in college was finance. So I have the construction background and I loved finance and I loved the mechanics of real estate. I thought that was really cool. So real estate was a perfect marriage of finance and construction because what I do is add value to real estate through construction, and the mechanics to get there are through the finances. So creative financing, understanding how banks work, what's a good deal, what's not a good deal, things like that. So that's how I got onto real estate. And so my wife and I are on our honeymoon, and this was while I was still working for Barrett. This will tie in the end of that conversation. So we're on our honeymoon. It's one of the last days, and I'm saying I got to go back to work, and I'm not all that excited about it, right? So my wife, being the amazing person that she is, says, "Why don't you quit? Why don't you go do the real estate thing that you've been wanting to do forever?" And I said, "You know what? You're right. Why shouldn't I do that?" So I got back from my honeymoon, went into my boss, Barrett's office, and said, "Hey, Barrett, I want to go do this thing." And he couldn't have been more supportive. It was outstanding. So put in my 2 weeks that day and started buying dilapidated houses and fixing them up.
Wow. And tell me about kind of like those early days of buying dilapidated houses. What was the first one like?
So the first one, this isn't a real estate show, so I won't get into the mechanics there, but it was kind of a half done rehab. And I went in, I bought the property. My dad's actually a partner in that one. And, he helped me buy the first one. And I went in and did everything to get that thing ready to rent.
All yourself?
I was doing drywall. I was painting. I was doing electrical, everything that didn't require its own license that I didn't have. So I went in and did that whole thing all by myself. Then the second one that ended up working, we refinanced it, put a tenant in it, all great things. Second one, hired a few contractors to come in and kind of supplement myself, what I was doing. Third one, I hired a general contractor and I was kind of working around them. Fourth one, general contractor, and I was just managing the contractor.
And so it's kind of like one thing led to another kind of. And then at what point did you see the opportunity to create a property management company? Because the property management company, that's maybe not the best way of describing it, but you represent people who want to buy properties and fix them up, and you kind of have a solution to help them with remodeling it without them having to get their hands dirty. Right.
Yeah. So it's a project management.
Yeah.
Property management is a whole different thing that I have done on my own properties and I don't want to do for anyone else. Right. It is, that's a very different business.
Yeah.
But so the project management, I got to a point where I was doing, at one point I had 5 deals that we were renovating all at once.
That's a lot of different details to manage, contractors, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I also at the time had 15 rental units. I had 3 deals that were under contract. I was refinancing 7 of those 15. And I had all of these things going on, and I was myself, right? There was no one else there to pick up any of the pieces.
You had no other staff helping you with that?
No other staff. No.
Wow.
No. So I was running all of that stuff. And the thing that dropped for me was those 5 projects that we had running. And I thought I could do that because I had a general contractor that had done the last 7 properties that I just bought, and they all went pretty well. And there were not any major issues. So I said to them, okay, do these 5 deals and do them exactly the same way you did the last 7, right? Just in, out, done, whatever. You know what I want, go do it. Because I had all this other stuff to take care of.
And even that seems like a challenge because every property is different. Every property has different issues.
Yeah. And for the most part, you're right. So there were some challenges, and I'm oversimplifying, of course, but
Yeah.
for the most part, it's, hey, I want gray walls, I want white trim, I want this cabinet, this countertop, this floor, like, all that, just do it. So I thought I could do that because I had kind of done that before, not realizing how much I actually managed that contractor through those other projects. So I, kind of let them go, and I was focused on my other things, getting all these big projects done with the financing, all the other stuff. And I came back after about 3 weeks to check in on the projects, and literally nothing had been done
Really?
in 3 weeks.
Jeez.
And so I call the contractor. I say, "What are you doing?" And excuse, whatever. So that was a point where I really had to stop and say, how do I fix this? How do I change this? And another mentor that I'm not sure we'll have time to talk about, but one of my other mentors that taught me a lot about the real estate business said to me that there are 4 parts of your business that you're going to have to continually strengthen. And one of them is always going to be the weakest, right? So it's construction, property management, financing, and deal flow. So at this point, the construction was my big hang up, and the other things were working okay. But, when you have to go focus here, something else falls, and whatever. So at that point, I had to stop and say, what are my options in the construction business? Can I hire someone full-time to manage projects? No, I've got 5 projects going on right now. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to continue that volume, and I can't support a full-time person to do that. So that option's out. Can I continue doing construction by myself and managing general contractors? No, I've got all these other things. So I was really stuck. And that's, among other things, kind of when it dawned on me that this should be just a service that someone else does for not a full time, not something like that. It needs to be project by project. So a couple of years later, I got through that time and made it all work. But a couple of years later, the opportunity kind of presented itself to start that company. And so now what we do is we manage construction projects for guys like me that either are out of state, or they don't understand construction enough, or they're just flat out too busy to manage their own projects. And we come in from the higher level of the project manager, and we're almost like an owner's representative in commercial construction. So that business kind of exists in commercial. I haven't seen it anywhere else in residential. So we represent the owner and make sure that schedules are being hit, budgets are being hit, the contractors are showing up on time, materials are showing up, inspections are getting done, the project's being done correctly, the cabinets are being installed correctly, and all of those little details. And we put it into a project management portal so that the client can be anywhere in the world and check in and see my schedule. We're still on schedule. We're still on budget. Here's what's happening on site. We've got pictures, reports, everything else, and everything's looking good. So that's really what we do.
Yeah. Now I want to take a step backward, and I don't think we talked about this, but your father's business actually, when the 2008 downturn hit, the recession had a big impact, and your father ends up having to close that company. What are your reflections on that? What is your memory of that time period?
Yeah. So again, a lot of formative times for me. That was a big one. So I said earlier that I was the kid that always asked questions, always wanted to know what was going on. So my dad let me in on the business. He told me what was going on, and maybe a little bit more than he should have for a kid of my age. But, I knew as things were kind of starting to hit the fan for a lot of people, not just my dad, I kind of knew some of the problems that were going on. And, I couldn't share that with my sisters. I couldn't share that with my brothers, because I knew that they didn't know and they didn't understand, and that they would be scared by that, because it was a little bit of a scary time for not only my dad, my family, but for a lot of people. So it not only taught me about, again, some of the mechanics. And after that, I went one of the real estate classes I took was in banking, and most of that class focused on the mechanics of why the Great Recession happened. And that was like fascinating to me. I love learning about that because it was so important for my upbringing. So, that all, it made a big impact on me, because not only did it spark that like understanding of, hey, there's more to it than, just going to work and getting things done, but there's also risks to running your own business. So I think if that hadn't happened to me, it hadn't happened to my dad, then I would probably have a very different risk tolerance right now.
Yeah.
Because, nothing bad had ever happened to me.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that it did was it gave me a lot of resilience when bad stuff does happen to me. So now I have bad stuff happen to me every day, and it's just another thing that, I get through it and I figure out a way to get around it.
Yeah. We're running a little short on time. I want to ask, since you and I connected through the Entrepreneurs Organization community, EO, you, through Barrett, who was a longtime member of EO, got exposed to that community. He took you to different events when you were younger. Talk a little bit about that, being around that community and kind of what it did for you, and as you were growing up and as you were kind of learning about entrepreneurship. Yeah.
So when I started working for him, that I had been to a couple of things with him throughout the years, and understood what this was, and he talked about it all the time. He talked about his forum. If you're familiar with EO, he talked about. I know you are, John, but the listeners here, we have small group forums. He talked about his forum all the time, and I started going to some events with him when I was working for him, because he thought it would be important for me to understand some of the things that they were learning at the events that I probably wasn't getting anywhere else from college or something like that. And I learned a lot of really interesting things. And some of the more impactful speakers events that I went to were inspirational, that were just to kind of open your eyes to say, there is so much out there that you have opportunity to go and seize. And so I grew up in that and joined the accelerator program a couple of years ago. My project management business came out of the accelerator, because that was where I kind of learned some of the things that I needed to understand to start that. And now I'm a member, and I'm the learning chair in Philadelphia for this year.
That's great. Wrapping things up, I love to ask people about what mentors, what friends, what peers and contemporaries helped them along the way. Obviously, you've mentioned a couple of them already, your father, your father-in-law. Any other ones that you would want to mention, that you would want to shout out and just kind of thank them for their support?
Yeah, absolutely. The last one is Jim Shields, is a friend that I met through my dad and Barrett. He did a very similar business to what I was trying to start. And he was gracious enough to take a couple of days and teach me the ins and outs of how he ran that business. And, he had several hundred units at his peak. And that was like, I wanted to be that guy. So, and ever since then, he's now a really close friend of mine, that whenever I needed help on something, or I needed to like a technical issue, or I needed to be put in touch with someone, or like, hey, how do I manage this situation? He was always a listening ear, and he's very even keeled. He's a very relaxed guy. And he always, like, I'd be super stressed about something because it's like a big deal for me. And he would come in with his experience and his just level head and say, dude, this is not a big deal. Like, here's A, B, and C ways to handle it, and you're going to make a good decision. And so that was really helpful. So
is this
Jim's
the same
listening to
Jim
this,
Shields, the same one from Board Meetings International?
It is. Yeah.
So my business partner, Jeremy's interviewed him. Yeah. I know of him. I've never interviewed him, but yeah.
Great guy.
So he does,
really great guy.
I don't know if he still does them, but he was doing retreats for entrepreneurs and their kids.
He does.
Focused on kind of helping cement that relationship between parents and children.
Yeah, absolutely. That was where I met him first. Was my dad and I went to one of his retreats.
Oh, cool.
So
very cool.
yeah, it was really great.
Well, Rich, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I'll make sure you have the link for my thing there. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook. Our website is flemingpm.com. There's a lot of info on our company there. I'll make sure you have a link to my contact page on there, and great. My email. I'll give you that as well if anyone wants to reach out. Yeah, great. We'll put it on the show notes page. For sure. Yeah. Thanks, Rich. Thanks so much. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.